Once upon a time, in the quiet hills of Vermont, where the maple trees whispered secrets to the wind and the rivers hummed lullabies to the stones, there lived a gentle wanderer named Elias. Elias was not like the hurried folks in the bustling cities. He moved with the rhythm of the seasons, his footsteps light as falling leaves. His home was a cozy cabin tucked away in a valley, surrounded by fields of wildflowers that bloomed in every color of the rainbow during spring and summer, and blanketed in soft snow during winter. But Elias's true joy came from his nightly rituals, stories told under the stars, meant to ease the mind into dreams. This particular story begins on a crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Elias sat by his fireside, a warm mug of chamomile tea in hand, gazing out at the fading light. He thought of the vast landscapes of America, from the rolling prairies of the Midwest to the serene beaches of California, and decided to weave a tale that would carry listeners across these lands gently, like a feather on a breeze. This is a story for those in the USA seeking peace before sleep, a continuous journey through tranquil worlds where worries dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Elias closed his eyes and began to imagine a young traveler named Mia. Mia lived in a small town in Ohio where the cornfield stretched endlessly under wide blue skies. She worked in a library surrounded by books that held adventures from around the world, but lately her days felt heavy with the weight of routine. One night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a soft whisper from the wind outside her window called to her. "Come," it said, "follow the path of dreams." Curious and weary, Mia slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in a soft blanket, and stepped into the cool night air. The stars twinkled above like scattered diamonds, and the moon cast a silver glow over everything. She followed a faint trail that led from her backyard into the woods, where fireflies danced like living lanterns. The air smelled of pine and earth, and each step she took felt lighter, as if the ground itself was cradling her feet. As Mia wandered deeper, the woods opened into a vast meadow, alive with the gentle sounds of crickets and distant owls. Here she met a wise old deer named Thorn, whose antlers gleamed like polished wood. "Welcome, seeker of rest," Thorn said, in a voice as deep and calm as a mountain stream. "I will guide you through the lands of serenity, where time slows and hearts find peace." Together they ventured westward, first crossing the mighty Mississippi River under a canopy of stars. The water lapped softly against the banks, reflecting the night sky like a mirror. Mia dipped her toes in, feeling the cool current wash away her tensions. Thorn told her stories of the river's history, how it had carried explorers and dreamers for centuries, its flow eternal and unhurried. They continued into the heart of the Great Plains, where the grass swayed like an ocean in the wind. Bison grazed peacefully in the distance, their massive forms silhouetted against the horizon. Mia lay down in the soft grass, staring up at the Milky Way, which stretched across the sky like a river of light. "Feel the earth's heartbeat," Thorn advised. "It beats slow and steady, reminding us that all things come in their time."
As dawn approached, painting the sky in soft pastels, they reached the Rocky Mountains. The peaks rose majestically, their snow-capped tips touching the clouds. Mia and Thorn climbed gently, not in haste, but with deliberate steps, breathing in the crisp, pine-scented air. Wildflowers dotted the paths, purple lupins and yellow columbines nodding in the breeze. At a high meadow, they rested by a crystal-clear lake, where trout leaped lazily from the water. The sun warmed their faces, and Mia felt a deep calm settle into her bones, like the quiet after a storm. Descending the mountains, they entered the deserts of the southwest, where the sunsets turned the sands into a canvas of reds and golds. Cacti stood sentinel, their arms raised in silent greeting. Under the vast sky, Mia marveled at the silence, broken only by the occasional call of a coyote or the rustle of a lizard. Thorn led her to an ancient canyon, carved by time and water, its layers telling stories of eons past. They sat on the edge, watching the shadows lengthen, and Mia whispered her worries into the wind, watching them drift away like dust. Further west, the landscape softened into the rolling hills of California, where vineyards stretched like green quilts over the earth. The Pacific Ocean awaited, its waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. Mia walked along the beach, the sand warm between her toes, collecting seashells that gleamed like treasures. Seals basked on rocks, barking softly, and pelicans glided overhead. As the sun set into the sea, turning the water to liquid gold, Mia felt the pull of the tide mirroring the ebb and flow of her breath. Inhale peace, exhale stress. But the journey wasn't over. Thorn guided her northward, through the ancient redwood forests of the Pacific Northwest. The trees towered like guardians, their trunks wide enough to hide secrets within. Ferns carpeted the forest floor, and a gentle mist hung in the air, making everything feel enchanted. Mia touched the bark of a giant redwood, feeling its age and wisdom. "These trees have stood for thousands of years," Thorn said. "They teach us patience and resilience." They crossed into the wilds of Alaska, where glaciers gleamed under the midnight sun. The air was crisp and pure, filled with the calls of eagles soaring high. Mia watched as auroras danced across the sky, greens and purples swirling like silk ribbons. Wrapped in her blanket, she lay on a bed of soft moss, the northern lights lulling her into a state of wonder and tranquility. Turning eastward again, they traversed the canyons of Utah, the lakes of Minnesota, and the forests of Maine. Each place offered its own gift: the echo of waterfalls in Yellowstone, the whisper of winds through the Badlands, the serene beauty of the Great Lakes reflecting the clouds. Mia's heart grew lighter with every mile, her mind clearing like a fog lifting from a valley. Finally, as the first light of a new day broke, they returned to the meadow where it all began. Thorn bowed his head. "You have journeyed far, but remember this path is always within you. Call upon it when sleep eludes you, and let the lands of America cradle your dreams." Mia awoke in her bed, the morning sun filtering through her curtains. She felt refreshed, as if she had truly traveled those miles. And from that night on, whenever she needed rest, she closed her eyes and let the story carry her away. But wait, dear listener, this is just the beginning of our tale. Let us delve deeper, expanding the horizons, painting more vivid pictures to soothe your soul. Imagine now that Mia, inspired by her dream, decides to embark on a real journey, packing a small bag with essentials, a journal, a water bottle, and her favorite blanket. She sets out at dawn, the dew still fresh on the grass, heading toward the Appalachian Trail, that legendary path winding through the eastern states. The trail welcomed her with open arms, its path lined with rhododendrons and mountain laurels. Birds sang melodies that harmonized with the rustling leaves. Mia hiked slowly, stopping often to breathe in the fresh air, to watch squirrels scamper up trees, or to sip from clear streams. In Virginia, she camped under a canopy of stars, the fireflies her companions. The crackle of the campfire was a gentle rhythm, lulling her to sleep. Continuing south, she reached the Smoky Mountains, where mist clung to the peaks like a soft veil. Bears lumbered in the distance, foraging peacefully, and wild turkeys strutted across her path. At an overlook, she sat and watched the sun rise, turning the mountains blue and gold. The world felt vast, yet intimate, each breath syncing with the pulse of nature. Venturing into the south, she explored the bayous of Louisiana, where Spanish moss draped from cypress trees like elegant curtains. Alligators basked on logs, their eyes gleaming, but they posed no threat in this dreamlike realm. She paddled a canoe through still waters, the paddle dipping softly, creating ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. The air hummed with the songs of frogs and insects, a natural symphony for slumber.
In Texas, the landscapes shifted to wide open skies and endless horizons. Mia rode a gentle horse through ranches dotted with longhorns, the clip-clop of hooves a steady beat. Wildflowers, bluebonnets, and Indian paintbrushes carpeted the fields, their colors vibrant against the earth tones. At night, she lay in a hammock, the stars so bright they seemed within reach, the Milky Way a bridge to infinity. Crossing into New Mexico, the adobe pueblos stood timeless, their earthen walls warm to the touch. Mia wandered through markets filled with turquoise jewelry and woven blankets, the scents of sage and chili filling the air. In the high desert, she hiked to hot springs, soaking in the mineral-rich waters that eased every ache, the steam rising like whispers of forgotten tales. Arizona's Grand Canyon awaited next, its vastness humbling. Mia stood at the rim, the Colorado River a silver thread far below. Ravens soared on thermals, their calls echoing off the walls. As the sun set, the canyon layers glowed in shades of crimson and ochre, a masterpiece painted by time. She felt small yet connected, part of something eternal. In Nevada, the neon lights of Las Vegas gave way to the quiet of the Great Basin, where ancient bristlecone pines twisted toward the sky, survivors of millennia. Mia meditated under their branches, the wind sighing through needles, carrying away thoughts of the day. California's coast called her back, but this time she explored the sequoias, hugging trees so massive they defied imagination. The forest floor was soft with fallen needles, muffling her steps. Owls hooted softly, guardians of the night. Northward to Oregon, where waterfalls cascaded like veils of lace. Mia stood in the spray of Multnomah Falls, the water cool on her skin, the roar a white noise that drowned out worries. Washington's Olympic Peninsula offered rainforests dripping with moisture, ferns unfurling like green fans. She walked beaches strewn with driftwood, the ocean waves a constant soothing rhythm. Alaska's fjords were a world of ice and sea, where whales breached gracefully, their songs vibrating through the water. Mia watched from a kayak, the paddle resting as glaciers calved with gentle cracks. Hawaii's islands provided a tropical interlude, though not mainland, a dream extension.
Volcanoes slumbered, lava fields black and stark, but beaches of white sand invited rest. She floated in warm waters, fish darting like jewels. Returning eastward, Mia traversed the Midwest's prairies, where windmills turned lazily and sunflowers turned faces to the sun. In Illinois, she visited Lincoln's home, feeling history's quiet presence. The Great Lakes shimmered like inland seas, their shores lined with lighthouses guiding the way. Mia sailed on Lake Superior, the water calm, reflecting clouds. New England's autumn foliage blazed in reds and oranges, a final burst of color. In Vermont, she returned to Elias's cabin, sharing her tales by the fire. And so the story loops, a continuous thread of peace. Let your eyes grow heavy, your breath slow, as the lands of America cradle you into sleep. The wind whispers good night, the stars watch over, and dreams await.
Now, let's imagine Mia's journey in finer detail, starting back in Ohio. Her hometown was a place of quiet streets lined with maple trees, where neighbors waved from porches and children played in yards until dusk. The library where she worked was an old building with creaky floors and shelves upon shelves of books, each one a portal to another world. But Mia longed for something more tangible, a real adventure to soothe her restless spirit. As she set out on her physical journey, the first leg took her to Pennsylvania, where the Allegheny Mountains rolled like gentle waves. She hiked trails covered in fallen leaves, the crunch underfoot a satisfying sound. Streams bubbled alongside, clear and cold, home to trout that flashed silver in the light. At night, she pitched a tent in a clearing, the stars emerging one by one, the Big Dipper pointing the way north. In West Virginia, the New River Gorge impressed with its deep canyon and arched bridge, the highest in the Americas. Mia stood on the bridge, feeling the wind tug at her hair, the river far below winding like a serpent. Kayakers dotted the water, their paddles dipping rhythmically. She descended to the riverbank, skipping stones across the surface, each skip a release of tension. Kentucky's horse country followed, with white fences and closing pastures where thoroughbreds grazed. Mia visited a farm, stroking the soft muzzles of horses, their eyes kind and knowing. The scent of hay and leather filled the air, and she rode a gentle mare through fields, the motion rocking her like a cradle. Tennessee's Great Smoky Mountains National Park was a highlight, with over 800 miles of trails. Mia wandered through old-growth forests where black bears foraged for berries, keeping a respectful distance. Waterfalls like Laurel Falls cascaded into pools perfect for dipping feet. The air was thick with the scent of wild azaleas, and fireflies lit the evenings like fairy lights. In North Carolina, the Blue Ridge Parkway curved through mountains, offering vistas that stretched forever. Mia drove slowly, stopping at overlooks to picnic on fresh apples from roadside stands. The fog rolled in, softening the world, making it feel like a dream. South Carolina's coast brought salt marshes and beaches. She walked barefoot on Hilton Head Island, the sand soft, the waves lapping gently. Dolphins arched in the distance, playful and free. At night, the sound of the ocean was a constant lullaby, pulling her into deep sleep. Georgia's Okefenokee Swamp was a world of cypress knees and alligators. Mia took a guided boat tour, gliding through black waters, egrets perched on branches. The stillness was profound, broken only by the call of birds. Florida's Everglades offered sawgrass prairies and airboat rides. Manatees floated lazily in canals, their gentle nature calming. Mia watched sunsets over the mangroves, colors bleeding into the water. Alabama's Gulf Coast had white sand beaches, where she collected shells and watched pelicans dive. The warm waters invited swimming, floating on her back, staring at clouds. Mississippi's Delta was rich with blues music history. Mia visited crossroads where legends were born, the air humming with imagined guitar strings. Arkansas's Ozarks had crystal springs and caves. She explored Blanchard Springs caverns, the drip of water echoing, stalactites hanging like icicles. Missouri's Mark Twain National Forest evoked stories of Huckleberry Finn. Mia floated down rivers, the current carrying her effortlessly. Iowa's cornfields were golden in the sun, wind rustling stalks like whispers. Nebraska's sandhills were undulating dunes covered with grass, home to cranes migrating. Kansas's Flint Hills preserved tall grass prairies, bison roaming free. Oklahoma's Route 66 remnants told tales of road trips past. Mia drove stretches, stopping at diners for pie. Colorado's Rockies soared, with aspen trees quaking in the breeze. She hiked to alpine lakes, the air thin and pure. Wyoming's Yellowstone was geothermal wonderland. Geysers erupted predictably, hot springs bubbled colors. Montana's Glacier National Park had turquoise lakes and grizzlies. Mia hiked going to the Sun Road trails. Idaho's sawtooths were rugged, with hot springs soaking away fatigue. Utah's Arches National Park had natural bridges, red rock glowing at dawn. New Mexico's Carlsbad Caverns descended into underground worlds, bats swirling at dusk. Arizona's Sedona had vortexes of energy, red rocks vibrating peace. Nevada's Lake Tahoe straddled states, its waters deep blue. California's Yosemite had granite cliffs and sequoias. Oregon's Crater Lake was volcanic, blue. Washington's Mount Rainier towered snow-capped. Alaska's Denali was wilderness, vast. Hawaii's Mauna Kea summit for stargazing. And back through the northern states, North Dakota's Badlands, South Dakota's Mount Rushmore, Minnesota's Boundary Waters, Wisconsin's Cheese Country, Michigan's Upper Peninsula, Indiana's dunes, Illinois' prairies, back to Ohio.
Mia woke before dawn, the echo of Thorne's farewell still soft in her ears. The Ohio sky was the color of a robin's egg just before the yolk breaks, and the air carried the sweet, damp promise of dew on corn. She did not pack much. The same blanket that had wrapped her dream self, a tin cup, a small notebook with a pencil tucked in its spiral, and a single photograph of her grandmother smiling on a porch swing in 1952. That was enough. The trail, she knew, would provide the rest. She left a note on the library's front door, gone walking, back when the moon is full again, and stepped onto the towpath that followed the old canal. Dragonflies stitched the morning light above the water. A great blue heron lifted off, slow wings beating like a heartbeat. Mia matched her stride to the rhythm. Left, right, breathe, release. By the time the sun cleared the treetops, she had crossed into Pennsylvania. The path narrowed, roots braiding across the dirt like the fingers of sleeping giants. She passed an abandoned lock, its wooden gates warped and silvered, water trickling through in a lullaby drip. She filled her tin cup, drank, and felt the cold travel all the way to her ankles. Somewhere inside the stone walls, a barn owl called once, soft, questioning, and did not call again. West Virginia greeted her with the smell of coal smoke and pawpaws ripening in the underbrush. She traded a story for a slice of cornbread at a roadside stand run by a woman named Delphine, who wore a John Deere cap and laughed like wind chimes. "The mountains keep secrets," Delphine said, pressing the warm bread into Mia's hand. "But they give 'em up if you walk slow enough." That night, Mia slept in a lean-to built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1937. The rafters still smelled of cedar. She traced the carved initials of boys who had once been her age and dreamed of somewhere else. The new river was wider than memory. Moonlight turned the water into hammered pewter. Mia launched a flat-bottomed John boat she found tied to a sycamore, its paint the green of oxidized pennies. She drifted with the current, trailing her fingers. Fireflies hovered above the surface, writing glowing cursive on the dark. A beaver slapped its tail once, twice. Then all was quiet except the hush of water against wood. She tied the boat to a root curled inside her blanket and let the river rock her like a cradle. Kentucky smelled of bluegrass and bourbon barrels. A chestnut mare named Clover carried her along fence lines whitewashed every spring. The horse's gait was a 4-beat lullaby. Mia's spine loosened with every step. They passed distilleries where the angels' share rose in invisible clouds, sweet and dizzying. At dusk, she unsaddled Clover in a field of fescue so thick it felt like memory foam. Crickets tuned their legs. A meteor shower began, silent green sparks falling upward into the dark. Mia counted 7 before sleep folded her in half. Tennessee's Smokies rose around her like the ribs of some ancient, breathing creature. She hiked the Alum Cave Trail at dawn, boots whispering over damp logs. Peregrine falcons wheeled overhead. Their cries were clean like glass breaking far away. At the bluff, mist pooled in the valleys below, slow and creamy. She sat on a slab of Anakeesta rock, still warm from yesterday's sun, and opened her notebook. Words came without effort. "The mountain does not ask my name. It only asks that I stay long enough to hear my own pulse slow." North Carolina's parkway unspooled like a ribbon of gray silk. She hitched a ride with a park ranger named Jonah, who played banjo in the passenger seat while she drove. He taught her the names of wildflowers, flame azalea, turtle head, doll's eyes, and how each one closed at night like a child's fist. They stopped at an overlook where the Blue Ridge layered itself into infinity, each ridge a softer blue than the last. Jonah left her there with a thermos of chicory coffee and the quiet assurance that the road would wait. South Carolina's low country smelled of pluff mud and resurrection fern. She walked the boardwalk at Huntington Beach Park State Park, sandals dangling from 2 fingers. Sandpipers ran ahead of the waves, stitching the wet sand with delicate prints. A loggerhead turtle lumbered from the dunes at twilight, ancient and deliberate. Mia sat cross-legged, watching the nest until the last hatchling flippered into the surf. The ocean took them without ceremony, the way dreams take worries.
Georgia's swamp was a cathedral of cypress knees and Spanish moss. She poled a cypress dugout through tea-colored water, the paddle making soft sucking sounds. An alligator slid off a log with the patience of a metronome. Dragonflies landed on her knees, iridescent as stained glass. At noon, the sun filtered through the canopy in pale green shafts. Dust motes drifted like slow snow. She tied the boat to a tupelo and napped in the shade, waking to find a barred owl staring from a branch not 6 feet away. It blinked once, slow as a shutter, then vanished. Florida's Everglades stretched flat and silver under a sky scrubbed clean. She kayaked through sawgrass that whispered when the wind passed. A roseate spoonbill flew overhead, pink wings beating like a heartbeat made visible. Manatees gathered at the mouth of a spring, gentle gray boulders exhaling clouds of bubbles. Mia floated among them, hair drifting like seaweed. One brushed her calf with its whiskery muzzle, soft, curious, gone. Alabama's coast was warm milk and sugar sand. She walked the pier at Gulf Shores barefoot, the boards sun-bleached and smooth. Fishermen cast lines that arced like silver lassos. Pelicans dive-bombed the water, emerging with pouches full of moonlight. She bought a paper cone of shrimp from a truck painted like a watermelon and ate it sitting on the hood of a borrowed pickup, salt wind drying her lips. Mississippi Delta nights smelled of turned earth and distant rain. She slept in a sharecropper's cabin restored by the National Park Service, the tin roof popping as it cooled. Through the screen door, she watched heat lightning stitch the horizon. A blues lift drifted from a juke joint a mile away, 3 chords and the truth. She fell asleep to the sound of a slide guitar crying like a midnight train. Arkansas's hot springs steamed in the dawn. She soaked until her fingertips pruned, the water tasting faintly of iron and thyme. Cave crickets chirped in the limestone darkness overhead. When she emerged, her skin smelled of minerals and forgiveness. Missouri's rivers braided themselves silver. She floated the current river on an inner tube, the water so clear she could see gars suspended like shadows. Kingfishers rattled past. At dusk, she built a small fire of driftwood and roasted potatoes wrapped in foil. The sparks rose straight up, writing invisible messages to the stars. Iowa's corn was taller than memory. She walked the rows at twilight, the tassels brushing her shoulders like blessings. A combine's distant lights moved slow as a planet. She lay down between the rows and watched the sky rotate, the Big Dipper pouring darkness into darkness. Nebraska's sandhills rolled like green oceans frozen mid-swell. She camped beside a lake no wider than a whisper. Sandhill cranes bugled overhead, thousands of them, their calls the sound of rusty gates opening in heaven. She fell asleep to that prehistoric music and dreamed of flying on necks longer than rivers. Arkansas's prairie winds smelled of sun-cured grass and bison. She walked the tall grass prairie preserve at dawn, the grass heads nodding heavy with seed. A badger watched from its burrow, black mask solemn. The horizon was so far away it curved, and the sky pressed down gentle as a palm. Oklahoma's red dirt roads glowed like embers at sunset. She followed Route 66 through ghost towns where neon signs flickered like memories. In Clinton, she ate peach cobbler at the Route 66 Museum Cafe and listened to a waitress named Darla tell stories of dust storms and dreamers. That night, she slept in a wigwam motel, the concrete teepee cool and smelling faintly of 1957. Colorado's aspens quaked gold. She hiked the maroon bells at first light. The peaks reflected so perfectly in the lake, it was impossible to tell where mountain ended and mirror began. A marmot whistled. She sat on a boulder and wrote, "I am learning the grammar of silence. Subject, the heart. Verb, to rest."
Wyoming's Yellowstone smelled of sulfur and sage. She watched Old Faithful erupt under a full moon, the plumes silver and soundless. Bison stood like statues in the steam. She walked the boardwalks at night, the geothermal pools glowing turquoise, bubbling soft as breath. Montana's Glacier National Park was all sky and stone. She hiked to Grinnell Glacier, the ice creaking like an old ship. Mountain goats balanced on impossible ledges. At the lake, she floated on her back, the water so cold it felt like forgiveness. Idaho's sawtooths cut the sky like broken glass. She soaked in a riverside hot spring, snowflakes melting on her eyelashes. A dipper bird walked the stream bed, bobbing like a metronome. Newfoundland's high desert smelled of piñon smoke and lightning. She slept in a Pueblo guest house, the adobe walls exhaling the day's heat. At night, the Milky Way was a river of salt spilled across black silk. Arizona's canyon was older than language. She hiked rim to river and back, the trail switchbacking like a heartbeat on a monitor. At Phantom Ranch, she drank lemonade so cold it hurt her teeth and slept in a cabin where John Wesley Powell once carved his name. Nevada's basin and range unfolded in endless folds. She drove Highway 50, the loneliest road, windows down, wind combing her hair. At a hot spring outside Austin, she floated under stars so thick they hummed. California's sequoias were cathedrals of bark and time. She lay inside the hollow of a fallen giant, the wood still fragrant after a century. A spotted owl called, "Who cooks for you?" and she answered in her sleep. Oregon's coast was all fog and roar. She walked the tide pools at Cannon Beach, anemones closing like slow green fists. Haystack Rock stood sentinel, guillemots wheeling around it like punctuation marks. Washington's rainforest dripped. She walked the Hoh under moss so thick it felt like walking inside a lung. Banana slugs glowed neon in the gloom. The sound of water was everywhere, constant, patient, kind. Alaska's midnight sun turned the world gold at 2 a.m. She paddled a fjord, icebergs calving with cracks like gunshots. A humpback breached, slow motion, and hung in the air longer than physics allowed. Hawaii's volcanoes steamed. She walked the crater rim at dawn, the ground warm beneath her soles. Nenegis honked like rusty hinges. At night, she slept on black sand, still holding the day's heat, the ocean breathing in and out. The return was slower, gentler. North Dakota's Badlands striped the earth in rust and cream. South Dakota's Black Hills smelled of ponderosa pine. Minnesota's boundary waters mirrored the sky so perfectly she paddled upside down. Wisconsin's dairyland smelled of silage and sweet clover. Michigan's dunes sang when the wind blew across them. Indiana's covered bridges creaked like old domes. Illinois' prairie sky pressed close enough to touch. And then Ohio again. The same cornfields, but the leaves were turning, gold, crimson, surrender. She walked the towpath home at twilight, fireflies fewer now, but brighter for their scarcity. The library door still bore her note, faded but legible. She unlocked it, stepped inside, and smelled paper and glue, and the faint ghost of every story ever told. She did not open for business the next day. Instead, she sat at the long oak table and began to write. The pencil moved without pause, the words flowing like the river she had drifted down months ago. When she finished, the notebook was full, the photograph of her grandmother tucked between the final pages like a bookmark in time. She titled it simply, "The Midnight Trail of American Dreams." And every night thereafter, when the moon rose fat and low, she opened the windows, sat on the porch swing, and read aloud to whoever cared to listen. Children on bicycles, old men walking dogs, moths batting against the screen. The words drifted out across the corn, across the canal, across the sleeping land, carrying listeners westward on a wind that smelled of pine and possibility. Somewhere, a weary traveler closed their eyes and felt the ground soften beneath them. Somewhere, a child stopped crying and listened to the sound of water over stone. Somewhere, an old woman smiled in her sleep, dreaming of a girl walking slow enough to hear the mountains breathe. The trail never ended. It only waited, patient as starlight, for the next tired feet.